Outside Warner Brothers, George Raft lit a cigarette and tossed away Casablanca as just another war picture, gambling immortality on a shrug. Clara Bow signed contracts without reading them, watching her fortune get stolen through the fine print. And John Gilbert laughed at talkies, insisting silence would last forever. Today, 18 dumbest actors from classic Hollywood, often remembered not for brilliance, but their blunders. Number 1. George Raft, the man who turned down immortality. He stood outside the Warner Brothers lot in 1942, cigarette smoke curling through the night air, when word spread that he had just refused Casablanca. To Raft, it was just another weird little war picture. To the rest of Hollywood, it became the film that made Humphrey Bogart immortal. That single shrug at destiny would echo through his career, as if he were determined to gamble away every chance at greatness. George Raft was no ordinary actor. He was the living face of the gangster era. Sharp suits, cold eyes, and the kind of swagger only a man raised in Hell's Kitchen could carry. Audiences first met him in Scarface, 1932, where his simple gesture of flipping a coin became iconic. For a moment, Raft looked set to be the king of Warner crime dramas. But while his peers read scripts with an eye for character and history, Raft skimmed them like a gambler eyeing the dice. He didn't care about story arcs or dialogue, only whether the character looked tough enough. The studios tried to guide him. In 1941, he was offered The Maltese Falcon. He refused. Too dark, too strange, he said. Bogart took it instead, and a new star was born. 2 years later, Raft dismissed Casablanca. Again, Bogart stepped in. Then came Double Indemnity in 1944, a film that would redefine the noir era. Raft turned that down as well, uncomfortable with playing a morally compromised man. 3 roles, 3 refusals, 3 masterpieces that slipped through his fingers. Off-screen, his choices were even more reckless. Raft was notorious for his friendships with real-life mobsters, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky. Studio memos described executives pacing their offices, terrified of the headlines his gambling debts might create. He was handsome, magnetic, and endlessly charming at the club tables, but his career slipped away chip by chip. By the 1960s, the man who could have been Bogart's rival was reduced to cameo work in forgettable B pictures. Number 2. Clara Bow, the it girl who never read the fine print. The contracts were stacked high on her desk, legal ink binding her to years of servitude, and Clara Bow signed them all without looking twice. By the time she realized what she had given away, the it girl of the 1920s was already trapped, her fortune siphoned, her reputation shredded, and her future fading fast. Hollywood had crowned her the queen of desire, but in fine print, it wrote her downfall. Clara Bow was more than a star. She was the emblem of the jazz age. When it, 1927, premiered, audiences didn't just watch her. They fell under her spell. Her flapper energy, bobbed hair, and uninhibited charm defined a generation's rebellion. She danced across screens in Wings, 1927, the first Academy Award winner for Best Picture, sealing her place in cinematic history. Yet while fans saw freedom, insiders saw vulnerability. Clara trusted agents, managers, and lovers who promised protection but delivered betrayal. Scandals piled high. Gossip columnists whispered about affairs, wild parties, and unladylike behavior that made her the target of moral crusaders. When financial mismanagement drained her accounts, she discovered that the men handling her money had treated her fame like their personal bank. Court battles revealed the mess in cruel detail, with headlines mocking her as naive. The once untouchable flapper suddenly looked like prey in a town that thrived on exploitation. Her transition into talkies only deepened the collapse. While her Brooklyn accent charmed some, studio executives found it jarring. Too rough for the polished elegance they demanded of leading ladies. Paramount grew impatient with her nervous breakdowns and delays, labeling her difficult. By 1931, at just 26 years old, Clara Bow had walked away from the screen that had made her immortal. She retreated to a Nevada ranch with her husband, cowboy actor Rex Bell. But the silence of retirement felt more like exile. Hollywood moved on without her, erasing the woman who once defined its very heartbeat. Clara Bow's tragedy wasn't a lack of talent. It was her blind faith in contracts, managers, and promises that turned her crown into chains. The it girl had it all, except the power to protect herself. Number 3. John Gilbert, the silent idol who laughed at talkies. The night he first tested his voice for sound, the projection booth fell into uneasy silence. John Gilbert, the matinee idol of the 1920s, had delivered his lines with the same passion that once made women faint in theaters. But MGM executives snickered. Whether it was his high-pitched cadence or simply Louis B. Mayer's vendetta against him, the verdict was whispered like a death sentence. Gilbert would never survive the talkies. Only a few years earlier, Gilbert was Hollywood royalty. His pairing with Greta Garbo in Flesh and the Devil, 1926, set box offices aflame, and gossip columnists dubbed him the great lover of the silent screen. His brooding eyes, chiseled features, and romantic intensity rivaled Valentino himself. In the heyday of silent films, he was the man every audience wanted to see. But the industry was shifting, and the arrival of sound in 1927 with the jazz singer marked a turning point Gilbert refused to take seriously. Pride became his undoing, while contemporaries like Clark Gable adapted to the new technology. Gilbert reportedly laughed off the sound craze, insisting audiences would never abandon the romance of silence. He sparred with Mayer, whose disdain for Gilbert was legendary. When his Glorious Night, 1929, premiered, Gilbert's overblown dialogue, "I love you, I love you, I love you," drew laughter in the wrong places. Whether the fault was in his delivery or MGM's sabotage, the damage was done. From there, his career unraveled. Roles dwindled, scripts grew thin. Once courted by every major studio, Gilbert found himself pushed into forgettable projects, while his rivals soared. By 1933, reduced to a contract with Fox, he was taking scraps far beneath his former stature. Friends recalled him drowning frustrations in champagne and card games, clinging to a past Hollywood had already buried. Number 4. Judy Garland, the voice that couldn't say no. She collapsed backstage at the Palace Theater in 1951, sequins still clinging to her gown, while an impatient stage manager begged her to rise for one more encore. Judy Garland's body was begging for rest, but her voice, and the endless demands around it, wouldn't let her. Hollywood and Broadway alike had discovered that Garland could never say no, even when it cost her everything. From the moment MGM stitched her into Dorothy's gingham dress for The Wizard of Oz, 1939, she was both a treasure and a prisoner of the studio system. Executives charted her days in pills and rehearsals, pressuring her to slim down, smile wider, sing louder. Louis B. Mayer himself reportedly called her "my little hunchback," a cruel reminder that the studio didn't see Judy the girl, only Judy the product. And so, at just 17, she was already locked in a cycle of sleepless nights, forced cheer, and contracts that demanded more than any starlet could possibly give. Her career soared. Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944, Easter Parade, 1948, and A Star is Born, 1954, secured her legacy. But behind every ovation was another cost. MGM's carefully crafted schedules left her reaching for chemical pick-me-ups to stay awake and sleeping aids to come down. She joked to friends that she didn't know where Judy ended, and the prescriptions began. But the joke wore thin. By the early 1950s, she walked off sets, missed call times, and left producers scrambling. The same voice that could silence an audience was now silenced by exhaustion, and yet, Garland kept returning to the stage. Concert tours, residencies, one-night-only specials, each billed as her comeback, each draining her further. Money troubles followed her like a shadow. Financial mismanagement and failed marriages left her perpetually in debt. Even when doctors begged her to rest, Judy signed the next contract, convinced the next ovation would fix everything. But applause is fleeting. What remained was a woman who gave too much, asked too little, and never learned to refuse the spotlight that burned her alive. Number 5. Marilyn Monroe, the star who believed studio promises. The cameras were waiting on the set of Something's Got to Give in 1962, but Marilyn Monroe never arrived. Fox executives fumed as production halted for days, then weeks. Headlines whispered of tantrums and lateness, but the truth was simpler. Marilyn believed every promise the studio fed her, and each broken contract chipped away at her career until there was almost nothing left to save. To the public, she was the luminous star of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953, and The 7-Year Itch, 1955, a walking fantasy who made glamour look effortless. But behind the scenes at 20th Century Fox, Monroe was trapped in a cycle of half-kept deals and stalled projects. She longed for serious roles, dramatic scripts that would silence critics who dismissed her as just another dumb blonde. Instead, Fox kept her tied to comedies, assuring her that the serious parts were just around the corner. Each time she signed, each time she trusted, those promises dissolved into delay. By the late 1950s, her frustration boiled over. On Bus Stop, 1956, she fought for method acting and more depth, only to be accused of slowing production. On Some Like It, Hot, 1959, her charm lit up the screen. But behind the curtain, she was hours late, missing cues, wandering in uncertainty. Co-star Tony Curtis once quipped that kissing her was like kissing Hitler, a cruel jab that echoed through gossip columns and painted her as unstable. Yet audiences adored her, and so she kept walking back into the fire. The unraveling came with Something's Got to Give. Fired for repeated absences, rehired after public uproar, then fired again, the project collapsed around her. Meanwhile, her personal life was equally storm-tossed. 3 marriages ended in heartbreak, and her closest relationships often pulled her deeper into self-doubt rather than lifting her out of it. Marilyn Monroe wanted respect. She wanted the industry to see beyond the smile and the curves, but she trusted the wrong men, the wrong contracts, and the wrong promises. Hollywood sold her a dream, and she bought it, until it cost her everything. Number 6. Wallace Beery, the brute who thought he was untouchable. On the set of Grand Hotel in 1932, Joan Crawford clenched her jaw between takes. Her co-star, Wallace Beery, had just yanked her arm hard enough to leave a bruise. All while the cameras weren't rolling, crew whispered that Beery's temper was legendary, his presence so volatile that even directors tiptoed around him. To audiences, he was the lovable brawler who won an Oscar for The Champ, 1931. To those who worked beside him, he was a menace hiding behind MGM's golden shield. Beery's fame was carved in the very heart of the studio era. His lumbering frame, gravelly voice, and gruff charm made him one of MGM's most bankable stars through the 1930s. Fans filled theaters for Viva Villa and Dinner at 8, never guessing that studio writers were quietly simplifying his scripts. He couldn't manage complex dialogue, insiders claimed, and often memorized lines phonetically without understanding the words. Jackie Cooper, his child co-star in The Champ, later recalled how Beery would pinch him on set just to force tears for the camera. To executives, he was both an asset and a liability. Box office gold wrapped in chaos. But Beery's self-destruction didn't stop at temper and ego. Flush with Hollywood money, he dove into wild ventures. He poured earnings into ostrich farms and novelty candy shops, declaring they'd be the next gold rush. Neither lasted. When asked at a studio gala to give thoughts on the political climate of the late 1930s, he shrugged and muttered, "I ain't got time for them kind of thinking." In an era when stars were expected to project sophistication, Beery wore his ignorance like a badge of honor. His recklessness soured countless relationships. Joan Crawford allegedly called him cruel, stupid, and arrogant. MGM tolerated him because his films sold, but colleagues dreaded sharing the screen. By the 1940s, as Hollywood shifted toward sharper dialogue and nuanced performances, Beery's blunt force style looked dated. His superstardom dimmed, leaving behind the echo of a man who mistook fear for respect. Number 7. Buster Crabbe, the hero who refused to grow. By the mid-1950s, Buster Crabbe sat in a lawyer's office, staring at paperwork that confirmed what he already feared. His swimming pool franchise had collapsed, swallowed by lawsuits and unpaid bills. The man who once saved galaxies as Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers couldn't save his own business. For a hero who conquered the screen with laser guns and loincloths, reality proved far more ruthless. Crabbe's ascent had been almost mythic. An Olympic gold medalist in 1932, Hollywood quickly turned his athletic build into box office muscle. Within a decade, he was a household name, swinging from vines as Tarzan and later blasting into space as Flash Gordon 1936 and Buck Rogers 1939. For Saturday matinee audiences, he was the very image of adventure, strong, noble, unstoppable. But behind the serial cliffhangers, Crabbe's career was already a cage. Producers saw him as the action man, nothing more. Offers for dramatic scripts came, but he turned them down, convinced fans would never accept him out of costume. Directors grew frustrated. His dialogue was often wooden, sometimes dubbed in post-production to cover flubbed takes. Historians later noted how scenes were tailored to minimize his lines, focusing instead on his leaps, punches, and heroic stares. Crabbe didn't mind. He believed the stunts were his ticket to immortality. But the industry moved forward. As Hollywood embraced complexity, nuance, and new stars like Kirk Douglas and Marlon Brando, Crabbe stayed frozen in the 1930s, still clinging to serials long after they'd gone out of fashion. Off-screen, his choices mirrored his short-sighted career. The swimming pool venture promised steady income, but collapsed under poor planning. Other attempts, from endorsements to television revivals, fizzled when Crabbe either demanded too much control or lost interest halfway through. By the 1960s, he was reduced to nostalgia cameos, a reminder of a boyhood hero who never grew up. Buster Crabbe's tragedy wasn't scandal in the tabloids or feuds in studio halls. It was quieter, more ironic. He believed standing still was enough, that audiences would always want the same hero. But Hollywood rewards reinvention. And for Crabbe, the final curtain revealed a hero who refused to change and was left behind. Number 8. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler, who gambled it all in. 1942, while Warner Brothers scrambled to keep Gentleman Jim on schedule, Errol Flynn was nowhere to be found. The studio's golden swashbuckler was across town, tossing dice in a smoke-filled casino, chasing fortunes he would never keep. To the public, he was the fearless rogue who swung from chandeliers and dueled with panache. To insiders, he was a man living on the edge, reckless with money, careless with love, and convinced the rules of Hollywood didn't apply to him. Flynn's rise had been meteoric. From Captain Blood, 1935, to The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, he embodied the dashing hero of Warner's golden age. Audiences adored his grin, his athletic swordplay, and his effortless charm. But behind that image was a man consumed by impulses. He bought yachts he couldn't afford, mansions he rarely lived in, and threw wild parties that bled into gossip columns. Contracts padded his bank account, but debts and lawsuits emptied it just as quickly. Even as Robin Hood stole from the rich on screen, Flynn was quietly squandering his own fortune off it. The darker turns came with his legal troubles. In the early 1940s, high-profile accusations dragged him into a trial that filled tabloids coast to coast. Though acquitted, the scandal left his reputation scarred, with headlines branding him as reckless both on and off the screen. Warner executives tightened their grip, reshaping his image into light comedies and war pictures, but Flynn resisted. He walked off sets, fought with directors, and indulged in nights that left him too unsteady to deliver lines the next day. By the 1950s, the heroic sheen had dulled. Offers dwindled as his debts mounted, forcing him into European productions far from the Hollywood throne he once ruled. Friends whispered of trembling hands and a face aged far beyond his years. He joked about his decline, masking the reality that he had gambled away his health, wealth, and legacy in equal measure. Errol Flynn gave the world Robin Hood, pirates, and duels under moonlight. But off-screen, his greatest battle was with himself, and it was one he never won. Number 9. Esther Williams, the mermaid who wouldn't leave the pool. In 1962, when MGM quietly closed its vast water tanks, Esther Williams's kingdom vanished overnight. The million-dollar mermaid who once floated in sequined swimsuits beneath golden spotlights suddenly found herself with nowhere to swim. Yet Williams refused to reinvent, clinging to the pools that had made her famous even as Hollywood drained them dry. Her rise had been dazzling. From Bathing Beauty, 1944, to Million Dollar Mermaid, 1952, she turned aquatic musicals into a box office phenomenon. Fans flocked to theaters for synchronized dives, choreographed splashes, and close-ups of her radiant smile breaking the water's surface. MGM sold her not just as an actress, but as a spectacle, the woman who could make swimming look like ballet. For nearly 2 decades, she reigned as Hollywood's queen of the pool. But Williams herself admitted she rarely read scripts. If the scene didn't involve water, she wasn't interested. As the 1950s ended, that loyalty to splash and sparkle became her undoing. The musical genre collapsed, and with it, MGM's willingness to bankroll water extravaganzas. Serious roles were offered: television dramas, character pieces, even stage opportunities. Williams turned them all down, convinced her fans would never accept her outside of a swimsuit. Studio heads grew frustrated, labeling her inflexible. By 1960, the once bankable star was being replaced by newcomers with sharper acting chops and more range. Off-screen, her business instincts fared no better. Williams invested in a line of swimsuits, but poor management and failed marketing left the company bankrupt within a few years. Her marriage to actor Fernando Lamas further sidelined her ambitions, as he famously pressured her to step back from the industry entirely. When she later reflected in interviews, she admitted, "I liked strong men. Maybe too much." By the time nostalgia tried to call her back, Hollywood had already moved on. Esther Williams's beauty and talent brought her to the pinnacle of fame, but she built her empire on water, and when it evaporated, so did her relevance. She had the chance to reinvent herself on land, but the mermaid chose to stay in the pool until there was no pool left. Number 10. Milton Berle, Mr. Television, who couldn't change his act by 1961. The man once nicknamed Mr. Television was bombing in front of a half-empty nightclub audience. Milton Berle was still recycling vaudeville gags from the 1930s, oblivious to the fact that America had moved on to sharper, fresher comedy. The same punchlines that drew 80% of the nation to their living rooms a decade earlier now landed with silence. For a performer who had ruled the small screen, the fall was almost unthinkable. At his peak, Berle was untouchable. In 1948, Texaco Star Theater turned him into a national obsession. Families rushed home to catch him in outrageous costumes, with sight gags so bold that department stores reported sales of television sets doubling just to see Uncle Milty live. He pioneered the very idea of appointment viewing, but Berle confused popularity with permanence. Instead of adapting, he clung to the same shtick: old vaudeville routines, oversized props, cross-dressing bits. Long after audiences craved sophistication, the industry tried to help him evolve. CBS executives pushed for fresher writers, new sketches, and modern formats. Berle refused, firing writers who questioned him and insisting that this is what made me famous. His arrogance kept him blind while television entered a golden age of edgy comedy with shows like The Jack Benny Program and later The Tonight Show. Suddenly, Berle's broad humor felt dated, even embarrassing. Offstage, his instincts fared no better. Determined to cash in on his brand, he invested in a chain of comedy clubs under his own name, but he rarely visited them, refused to adjust the acts, and within 2 years, the venture collapsed in bankruptcy. The man who had once pulled in millions for NBC was now scrambling for guest spots and casino gigs, his jokes sounding older each year. Milton Berle's story is not one of a man without talent, but of a man who mistook yesterday's laughter for tomorrow's guarantee. He helped build television, but when it demanded reinvention, he stubbornly stayed put. And by the time he realized the punchlines had run dry, the spotlight had already shifted to someone else. Number 11. Frank Fay, the funniest man who couldn't shut his mouth. By 1935, the man once hailed as the greatest stage comedian in America was playing to half-empty clubs. His name whispered more with disgust than admiration. Frank Fay hadn't just lost Hollywood. He had burned it to the ground around him. His arrogance, his cruelty, and his drunken tirades had turned the industry's brightest star into its most notorious pariah. In the 1920s, Fay reigned supreme. On Broadway, his timing, voice control, and effortless command of audiences made him a sensation. Warner Brothers courted him during the dawn of sound, hoping his stage presence would transition into stardom. He appeared in God's Gift to Women, 1931, expected to cement him as a leading man of the new era. Instead, audiences found him wooden, stiff, and utterly lacking in charm on screen. Worse still, Fay himself dismissed talkies as beneath his talents, sneering at producers who begged him to adapt. His offstage behavior quickly overshadowed what talent remained. Fay was notorious for his caustic tongue. He mocked crew members, insulted colleagues, and hurled racial and anti-Semitic slurs at a time when Hollywood was led largely by Jewish studio heads. George Burns once said of him, "The funniest man who ever lived, and the most detestable human being I ever met." Those words spread through industry circles like wildfire, sealing his reputation. His marriage to actress Barbara Stanwyck only added fuel to the scandal. Behind closed doors, his drinking and temper led to bitter fights. Stanwyck divorced him in 1935, citing cruelty, and her rising fame soon eclipsed his entirely. While she became a legend in films like Stella Dallas, 1937, and Double Indemnity, 1944, Fay was reduced to heckling from the shadows, unable to escape his own bitterness. By the 1940s, Frank Fay was unemployable in Hollywood. He shuffled between second-rate nightclubs and shabby hotels, clinging to stories of how he once invented modern stand-up. But the truth was darker. He hadn't been undone by rivals or bad luck, but by his own inability to control his tongue. Frank Fay thought applause made him invincible. In the end, it only made his fall louder. Number 12. Jean Arthur, the recluse who sabotaged herself. On the night of a major premiere, when other stars basked in flashbulbs and applause, Jean Arthur slipped out a side door, trembling. She couldn't bear the press, the stares, or the interviews. Hollywood adored her voice, that airy, husky tone that lit up Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 1939, but off-screen, Arthur recoiled from the very fame she had earned. For an actress at the peak of her power, her refusal to play the game became the scandal that defined her. Jean Arthur was once called the quintessential screwball heroine, with roles in Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, 1936, and You Can't Take It With You, 1938. She embodied wit, warmth, and a sharpness that made audiences love her. Yet while her films filled theaters, she dreaded publicity. She turned down interviews, avoided studio banquets, and ducked photographers. Studio publicists, who thrived on polishing stars into larger-than-life figures, called her impossible. But Arthur wasn't stubborn for drama. She was paralyzed by fear. Gossip writers painted it as arrogance, and the whispers began. Was she too good for Hollywood, or simply too fragile to last? Her reclusiveness only deepened when it came to career-defining offers. In 1946, Frank Capra offered her the role of Mary Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. It was hers for the taking. She refused, citing exhaustion and fear of the spotlight. The part went to Donna Reed, and with it, immortality slipped through Arthur's hands. Other scripts followed, including roles that might have reinvented her in the 1950s, but she declined again and again. Each no closed a door she could never reopen. By the early 1950s, Arthur walked away from Hollywood entirely. She retreated to teaching drama, occasionally resurfacing on Broadway, but never reclaiming the glory of her film days. To the public, she became a ghost, a beloved face frozen in celluloid, never aging because she had vanished before time could catch her. Jean Arthur's tragedy wasn't scandal in the tabloids or courtroom whispers. It was quieter, more ironic. She had the talent, the films, and the legacy. What she didn't have was the will to stand in the spotlight. In the end, she sabotaged herself by hiding from the very fame she had earned. Number 13. Rod Steiger, the genius who said no too many times. When the role of General George S. Patton was offered in 1970, Rod Steiger scoffed. "Too patriotic, too obvious," he said, waving it off as beneath him. When Francis Ford Coppola later approached with The Godfather, Steiger again refused, dismissing it as just another gangster picture. Both roles went to other actors, George C. Scott and Marlon Brando, who turned them into career-defining triumphs. For Steiger, the refusals weren't just bad luck. They became the symbol of a genius undone by his own perfectionism. At his best, Steiger was magnetic. His Oscar-winning turn in the Heat of the Night, 1967, remains one of cinema's most riveting performances. His Sheriff Gillespie seething with tension opposite Sidney Poitier. Audiences also remember him from On the Waterfront, 1954, where his desperate "I could have been a contender" scene with Brando electrified the screen. But while Brando thrived on instinct, Steiger labored over every syllable. He dissected scripts with surgical precision, driving directors to despair with endless demands for retakes. To colleagues, he was brilliant and exhausting. His meticulousness often shaded into arrogance. He dismissed projects others saw as promising, convinced he could predict what would endure. When he declined Patton, insiders whispered he feared being typecast as military men. When he rejected The Godfather, he reportedly complained the role of Don Corleone wasn't written with enough nuance. Both times, his rivals walked away with Oscars while Steiger watched from the sidelines, stewing in regret. The fallout was brutal. Studios grew wary of his unpredictability. By the mid-1970s, the offers shrank, and Steiger, once courted for every major drama, found himself drifting into television movies and lesser productions. His insistence on absolute control, the very quality that made his best work unforgettable, had alienated the system that once celebrated him. Rod Steiger's downfall wasn't scandal in the tabloids or affairs splashed across gossip columns. It was quieter, more tragic. A man too exacting for an industry built on compromise. Hollywood gave him masterpieces. He gave Hollywood no, and by the time he wanted to say yes, the roles that mattered were already gone. Number 14. Peter Lorre, the ghost who feared reinvention. By the 1950s, Peter Lorre wandered Hollywood lots like a ghost of himself, pale, restless, and visibly shaking. Casting directors whispered about his reliance on morphine, a habit born years earlier after surgery, and how it left him unreliable. Yet the real tragedy wasn't only his dependence on relief, it was his refusal to escape the shadow of villains that had made him famous but slowly strangled his career. Lorre's legend began in Germany with Fritz Lang's M, 1931, a chilling performance so unforgettable that audiences recoiled at the mere sight of him. Fleeing Nazi Europe, he remade himself in Hollywood, where Warner Brothers immediately typecast him as the sinister foreigner. From The Maltese Falcon, 1941, to Casablanca, 1942, his bug-eyed stare and hushed voice made him the perfect henchman, the sly schemer lurking in the corner. Fans adored it, but the actor behind the mask loathed it. He longed for range, for complex characters. Still, when studio offers came for new directions, he often turned them down, convinced they were beneath his artistry. That stubbornness cost him dearly. Directors like Alfred Hitchcock initially championed him. The Man Who Knew Too Much, Boy 1934, showcased his menace in unforgettable fashion. But when lighter or more varied roles appeared, Lorre dismissed them, saying he was nobody's clown. Instead, he clung to noir shadows, which by the 1950s had grown stale. Younger actors seized the roles he rejected, leaving him trapped in recycled parts. Forever, the creepy foreigner. As his career narrowed, his reliance on morphine deepened. Friends recalled his trembling hands, his distracted silences, his struggle to finish long shoots. Warner eventually let him go, his box office pull no longer enough to outweigh the risk. By the time he tried to reinvent himself with television cameos, the audience had already moved on. Peter Lorre's tragedy wasn't that Hollywood betrayed him, it was that he betrayed himself, unable to break free from the very image that made him a star. He was the ghost in every room, brilliant but bound, a man who might have been anything, if only he had dared to be more than the villain. Number 15. Tony Curtis, the idol who played it shallow on the set of Spartacus, 1960. While Laurence Olivier and Kirk Douglas debated the weight of history, Tony Curtis worried more about how the lighting hit his profile. Crew members whispered that the matinee idol was obsessed with angles, terrified of looking less than perfect. For a man who fought his way up from the Bronx, Curtis seemed determined to protect his looks at the expense of everything else. His craft, his reputation, even his marriages. Curtis burst onto the scene in the late 1940s, his slick black hair and piercing eyes making him Universal's answer to Montgomery Clift and Marlon Brando. By the mid-1950s, he was everywhere. Trapeze, 1956. Sweet Smell of Success, 1957. And the immortal comedy Some Like It Hot, 1959, where his Cary Grant impression opposite Marilyn Monroe stole laughs across the world. But while Monroe's fragility stirred sympathy, Curtis's image remained shallow. A pretty face in an industry that soon demanded depth. Offers for more dramatic roles did come. Critics praised his turn in The Defiant Ones, 1958, which earned him an Academy Award nomination. Yet Curtis struggled to capitalize. Friends and directors described him as restless, flitting between projects for money rather than substance. He craved serious recognition, but often settled for lightweight scripts that kept him visible but not respected. His personal life mirrored his professional chaos. Curtis rushed into 6 marriages, most famously to Janet Leigh in 1951. The glamorous pairing made headlines, but his impulsiveness and infidelities cracked it apart by 1962. Each failed relationship chipped at his stability, with tabloids portraying him as a man who could win women but not keep them. Business ventures fared little better, with Curtis investing unwisely in side projects that vanished as quickly as they appeared. By the 1970s, the idol of the 1950s had aged out of his heartthrob status. Roles grew smaller, and Curtis struggled to convince the public he was more than a relic of the studio system's glossy poster era. He once admitted, "I was a better star than actor." That honesty was rare and painfully true. Tony Curtis had the chance to be remembered for genius. Instead, Hollywood remembered the smile, the hair, the shallow glitter of a man who played it too safe. Number 16. Guy Madison. The pretty face with nothing behind it. When producers first spotted Guy Madison in uniform during World War II, they thought they had struck gold. He looked like a poster boy for Hollywood. Square jaw, broad shoulders, a gleam that screamed stardom. But when the cameras rolled, the truth slipped out. Behind the handsome face was a wooden performance that audiences quickly grew weary of. Hollywood could sell his looks, but it couldn't disguise the emptiness beneath them forever. In the late 1940s, Madison was hailed as the next big leading man. David O. Selznick gave him a contract, and fan magazines swooned over his debut in Since You Went Away, 1944. Soon he was headlining westerns and war dramas, his image plastered across teen fan clubs and pin-up walls. Yet the applause never matched the advertising. Critics skewered his flat delivery, noting he moved stiffly on screen, as if the lines were foreign to him. While contemporaries like Gregory Peck and William Holden evolved into nuanced actors, Madison remained little more than a uniform with a smile. Desperate to stay relevant, Madison leaned into television. His role in The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, 1951 to 1958, gave him steady work and cemented him as a Saturday matinee cowboy. But when the show ended, so did his momentum. Studios stopped calling, and Madison discovered too late that he had built his career on a typecast image he could never shake. The same boyish looks that once drew applause now worked against him, trapping him in shallow parts he was too old to play. Off-screen, his decisions were just as misguided. Madison poured money into bizarre ventures, including half-baked cattle ranching schemes and ill-fated business partnerships that collapsed almost as soon as they began. Financial mismanagement left him scrambling, forced into cheap European films during the 1960s, where even fans struggled to recognize the once-hyped American Idol. Guy Madison's tragedy wasn't scandal in the tabloids or shocking courtroom drama. It was quieter, more humiliating. A man who mistook good looks for longevity, who believed stardom could survive without substance. Hollywood sold him as the dream. But when the dream wore thin, there was nothing left behind the pretty face. Number 17. Frances Farmer, the rebel who burned too bright. In 1943, police dragged Frances Farmer out of a Los Angeles hotel lobby, kicking and screaming as flashbulbs popped. She had refused to appear in court for a drunk driving charge, and now the newspapers had their prize. The once rising star reduced to a public spectacle. The mugshot that followed, wide-eyed, defiant, wild, became the most enduring image of her career. Frances Farmer wasn't destroyed by one scandal. She was destroyed by her refusal to bend at all. Farmer's fame had come quickly. She captivated audiences in Come and Get It, 1936, and shone opposite Cary Grant in The Toast of New York, 1937. Tall, striking, and fiercely intelligent, she had the makings of a major star, but unlike her contemporaries, Farmer had no interest in playing Hollywood's obedient game. She bristled at studio contracts, turned down publicity tours, and openly mocked the shallow world of gossip columnists. Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons painted her as arrogant, feeding a cycle of rumors that magnified every misstep. The breaking point came with her clashes at Paramount. Studio executives demanded she smile for photographers and take fluff roles. Farmer balked, calling the scripts garbage and storming off sets. Her erratic behavior escalated. Public outbursts, missed calls, and barbed comments about Hollywood's hypocrisy. What others might have concealed, Farmer flaunted, daring the system to fight back. And it did. By her late 20s, her career had collapsed. Arrests followed, along with a series of institutionalizations that cast her less as a star than as a cautionary tale. Rumors about the brutality she faced behind hospital walls added to the legend. But the tragedy was simpler. Farmer had rejected the one thing Hollywood demanded: compliance. When she finally returned to acting in the 1950s, the world had moved on. She found scraps of work on television, but the glory she might have had was gone forever. Frances Farmer's story is one of brilliance scorched by defiance. She wanted art, truth, and freedom in an industry built on illusion. In the end, she burned too bright for the system that tried to cage her, and was consumed by her own fire. Number 18. Jayne Mansfield, the genius who played dumb. In 1955, Jayne Mansfield marched into a studio meeting with a pink notepad, batting her lashes, and pretended not to understand the contract in front of her. Behind the act, she could recite Shakespeare, quote, philosophy, and spoke 5 languages. With an IQ of 163, Mansfield was far sharper than the dumb blonde she sold to the world, but Hollywood didn't want her brilliance. And, tragically, neither did she. Her rise was a masterclass in self-promotion. After Marilyn Monroe refused to attend a press junket, Mansfield showed up in her place, wearing a scandalous dress, ensuring every camera turned her way. Within months, 20th Century Fox had crowned her the new blonde bombshell, plastering her across films like The Girl Can't Help It, 1956, and Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, 1957. Her figure, her giggle, and her calculated oops moments made her a household name. But beneath the flashbulbs, she turned down more serious projects that might have reshaped her legacy, choosing instead to double down on parody. Directors grew frustrated. Billy Wilder reportedly considered her for dramatic roles, but she leaned too hard into comedic winks and exaggerated squeals. Gossip writers loved her antics. The wardrobe malfunctions, the staged poolside photos, the lavish parties with pet chihuahuas in attendance. Yet every stunt chipped away at her credibility. Where Monroe fought for respect, Mansfield played to the joke until the joke swallowed her whole. Her personal life mirrored her career. Impulsive and chaotic. 5 children, 3 marriages, and a string of tabloid affairs kept her in headlines, but drained her finances. In a bid for stability, she toured in second-rate stage shows and nightclub acts. But the glamour was fading. By the mid-1960s, she was accepting roles in European B-movies. Her star power dimmed to a faint neon glow. Jayne Mansfield was no fool. She knew exactly what she was doing, but brilliance without restraint can be just as dangerous as ignorance. Hollywood wanted her to play dumb, and she obliged, until the persona consumed the person. In the end, Jayne's greatest tragedy wasn't that she lacked intelligence, but that she never let the world see it. Hollywood's golden glow hid shadows of pride, vanity, and heartbreak. Reminders that even legends were only human. Which downfall struck you most? Share your thoughts below, and if you cherish these forgotten stories, be sure to like, subscribe, and join us for more secrets the studios tried to bury.